Warning: the following podcast contains graphic content that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Discretion is advised. The podcast is available free of charge thanks to the support of Cracked Armor. Their mission is to raise awareness for PTSD, TBI, and mental health to support those who struggle. By creating an army of warriors who represent the gear, their hope is that it will send the message to others that they are not alone. Go to crackedarmor.com, say hi to Mark Long, read about the story, find some research information about PTSD, and support the cause by buying some gear.
(10-9). Did you say Papa Tango Sierra Delta? 10-4.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I sing. Don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
This is episode 7 of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. My name is Larry Payton, and I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. I want to start off with a message I received last week. I'm going to kind of chop it up a little bit and make a couple of changes just to make sure that I protect the anonymity of the sender. However, you'll still get the point. Hi Larry, I just medically retired about a week ago with CPTSD, anxiety, insomnia, depression, etc. I heard about your podcast talking to a military veteran at the motorcycle show in Halifax yesterday, and my wife and I put it on as we drove back home. I had to turn it off more than once to pull myself together in the passenger seat before I could keep listening. Your interview with Mark Long was so brutally honest, and it was like I was hearing my own story. I wanted to tell you that your podcast is fantastic. It's the first time that I have heard someone talk about their experience going through the meat grinder, and I can completely understand and relate to everything you and your guests are talking about. When Mark Long said that he kept thinking, I can't fucking do this anymore, it really connected with me. I've been screaming that in my brain for years and still got up every day, fought a smile on my face, and went to work. I wondered how long I could continue that, and I eventually learned the hard way. I think I found your podcast at just the right time. I'm at the stage now where I'm trying not to flatten my emotions with chemicals and get out of the house more. I just went for a walk and listened to your 3rd episode. I hope you are getting lots of positive comments on your podcasts, and if not, then you should be. You have one attentive listener in me. Thanks for what you are doing, and keep it up. To my brother or sister in arms who sent me that message, know that it really hit home, and I appreciate your words. It's certainly easy to say that the entire message had an impact on me. But there's one line in particular that truly resonates, because I feel it captures what we are all trying to do on this podcast. And when I say we, I mean me, absolutely. But I also 100% mean those guests, those brothers and sisters who come on, who are struggling and who talk about their struggles. We are trying to open the door to conversation. We are trying to destigmatize, or at the very least, let people know it's okay. The line of the message was, it's the first time that I have heard someone talk about their experience going through the meat grinder, and I can completely understand and relate to everything you and your guests are talking about. First time I've heard someone talk about their experience going through their meat grinder. I mean, this brother or sister have been going through the meat grinder for a long time, but never heard other people talking about it. And that makes it so fucking difficult to actually then be the one who talks about it. Because let's be honest, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Of course it is. I mean, talking about health can be uncomfortable. Then you get into mental health. Whoa, whole other set of fucking marbles there. So speaking up and speaking out about post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress injuries, traumatic brain injuries, operational stress injuries, whatever you want to call what the fuck is going on in their heads. I believe it's the right thing to do. I truly believe it is right. And I really try to live my life every day, especially when it comes to the big decisions, the tough ones, the important ones, to do what I truly believe is right. So I was thinking the other night as I'm lying down, once again trying to get to sleep, and I realized that the most disappointing times were those I failed to give my all, and I failed to commit to what I saw as right. And there are times like that. Times I just shut my mouth, never said anything. Times that I just told myself, toughen up, get out there, do it. Times that I probably should have approached other team members to see if they were doing okay, and probably should have told the truth to them when they asked if I was doing okay. I generally always do what I feel is right, but those times that I failed to give it my all and failed to commit to what I saw as right, those kind of haunt me. And so that brings me to now. I'm doing what I feel is right. As I've said before, I don't know what's going to become of it. I certainly hope that I'm helping people. I also hope that I'm helping tear down some of the walls. But I do know that the right thing is to speak up and speak out. Brings me to a quote that I've recently read. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. That was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said that. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Well, it seems to be that I've been reborn, because there was a beginning of my end, but that's over. I feel as though I am starting to understand who I'll be post law enforcement days. And it feels invigorating, actually. It feels good. I feel alive again, like I feel that I've unloaded a lot of weight. I am thoroughly enjoying speaking with others who also are struggling, because I feel there's a connection there that I just can't get elsewhere. And ultimately, if anything, I hope I'm the voice for those who, for whatever reason, are unable to speak up. I just want you to know that if you've taken the time to reach out and message me and feel comfortable enough to share your story, or just pass on some thanks for the podcast, for speaking up, speaking out, then I really appreciate you. I truly appreciate you. And you are helping me just as much. We're in this together. This podcast is not mine. It's ours. It's all about looking after each other, taking care of each other, being there for each other, and doing our damn best to make sure that we don't lose another one because they decided to extinguish their light. Let's take a quick break.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you have experience with post-traumatic stress and would like to join me for an episode, please reach out to me. You can contact me via direct message on Instagram, PTSD_podcast, or you can send me an email at Papa Tango Sierra Delta Podcast @gmail.com. Cheers.
And we are back from the break. Larry Payton again, and thank you for tuning in to the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. I want to introduce today's guest. Very, very happy to have Mr. Michael Terry on, who is a 23-year vet of the Canadian Armed Forces, who retired in 2018. And we'll get into his story, but by dealing with his PTSD, he came up with a pretty damn kick-ass idea that has really started making a difference. Michael, welcome to the show, buddy.
Well, thank you so much, Larry.
I guess, you know what, we'll start off very simply with just tell us about your journey. I mean, if you're comfortable talking about your time before the forces, during your time in the outfit, yeah, just tell us about what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I grew up in southwestern Nova Scotia, so that might resonate with some of your listeners, some of those who are around home. Joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1995, right out of high school. Started with the reserves in Truro, Nova Scotia. and transferred to the regular force in 1998 to the Royal Canadian Regiment. So I was in the infantry and did 3 operational tours with the regiment: Bosnia in 1999, Ethiopia, Eritrea in 2000 and 2001. So did do 2 tours back to back, and Afghanistan in 2008. I was actually diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and operational stress injury in 2001, shortly after I came home from Africa.
Wow.
Yeah, so I continued to serve another 17 years after that diagnosis and deployed to Afghanistan, in 2008, having been diagnosed with PTSD. So yeah, I had a pretty long history of kind of wrangling with it, managing it, but that also, part of that managing, unfortunately, was a lot of minimization and denial. So I was managing it, but not healing, not addressing it really. So that led to my release in 2018. I was all set. I was signed on for another 5 years beyond that. But it just got to the point that I couldn't tolerate being in the forces anymore. I wasn't healthy. I was getting worse, pretty quickly. So I had to make the very difficult decision to leave.
That is a tough decision as well. It's fine for everyone to kind of think about, I can't wait to get out. I know I'm looking forward to getting out. However, things change as well when that time comes, because it's not always as easy as you would think. What was life like on your transition from leaving the forces to finding civilian life?
Well, it's been about 5 years. I wasn't ready to leave. I didn't want to leave. I had to. At least I kind of submitted to that bit of wisdom that it was time for me to leave instead of trying to hang on to it. By the time I left, my last year of service was terrible, was the worst year of my life. By the time I left in 2018, I was actually on the verge of suicide. I was ready to take my own life. And I was going to go to college in Simcoe, Ontario, take Fanshaw's Adventure Expedition program. And I released in April of 2018. And of course, school started in September. So it was great that I had a plan, but I had 5 months to kill between my release and going to school. And I knew in the state that I was in and the community I moved to, I didn't know anybody. I had my wits about me enough to know that bad things were going to happen if I didn't do something positive. And that's really kind of what got the ball rolling as far as the ride, as Dispatch Adventure Ride. That's really how it started. But that was also the beginning of my journey where I stopped minimizing it. I stopped hiding from it and started to kind of address the injury I had head on.
That's fantastic. And so before we move on to addressing it, which is a huge step, a much bigger step in my opinion than trying to find your way into civilian life, tell us about what was going on in terms of your symptoms. What is it you were feeling? What is it you were thinking? Obviously, if it led you to suicidal ideations, then yeah, things were pretty serious. We can all almost think of the typical things that you would read or see on movies or whatever with regards to PTSD. But I know I have a lot of them, but I know I've got some different ones as well. And so I always find it good to share, because I think there's people that are sort of wondering, well, I don't really feel this way. Does this mean I have it or I don't have it?
Yeah.
What's going on with you in terms of symptoms?
I kind of ran a gamut kind of throughout that 17 years that I continued to serve. A lot of emotional numbing, a lot of compartmentalization. So I was a very different person at work than I was at home. It's funny, I talk to people now, I tell them I was injured in 2008, I was injured in 2009, and they look at me like, you were? They can't believe it.
Yeah.
But I really led 2 lives. I was kind of excited and happy at work. And then at home, I was a completely different person. I was just emotionally numbed out. I was emotionally distant and unavailable. I was depressed. I was angry, just kind of suffering all the time. And one of the other things that kind of hit it at work was I was a workaholic. I was an overachiever, chronic overachiever. And I think really what that comes down to is you get this injury. And in 2001, when I was diagnosed, PTSD was a one-way ticket out of the forces. Like, we're gone.
Absolutely. Yep.
And it was the forces who diagnosed me. So it's not like I can hide it. And that's when I started to really aggressively manage it. And I compensated by being an overachiever and a workaholic.
Right.
And years after being an overachiever, being a perfectionist, really just proving to myself that I'm okay. I'm proving to everybody else that I'm okay and that I belong is kind of, I think, the underlying part of that, as well as distraction from the injury. That just wears you down. But I also had struggles with addiction throughout my career, terrible impulse control. I lived in crippling debt for my entire career almost because of those impulse controls and not looking after the household finances, because all I wanted to do was go out soldier. I needed to be out and be distracted.
Yeah.
I think it was just this culmination of all of these symptoms. And one of the struggles I find even now, 5 years out, I still struggle to articulate how much I struggle. I had almost 2 decades of habitual minimization. It is a very, very deeply entrenched habit. And I still catch myself glossing things over with my psychologist and my caregivers. I still find myself clamming up with my wife sometimes, just instinctively, because it's very deeply ingrained. And it's actually been a roadblock to getting supports through Veterans Affairs. Because every time I go to take one of the never, sometimes, rarely, often tests, we all know those ones.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Mike.
Yeah, you have no clue, right? I should know the proper order. I've done so many of them. But you sit down to answer one of those, and I find myself still minimizing and not able to recognize all the ways I struggle. So I'm still very much learning how I'm affected. I'll be honest, there's some days where I'll kind of be struggling, then I'll look around and realize, oh, I struggle with this. I never realized this. My classic comment at the end of any response I give is, did I answer your question?
There you go.
Because
you're wondering, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what? Because I have this habit where about 30 seconds in, I'll just kind of lose the thread. So, yeah, did I manage to answer your question?
You definitely answered the question, my friend.
Okay.
And there's a number of things I wanted to go off in terms of what you said. So I love that you had mentioned numb. That is a huge thing that I found as well. That I think I was actually a little envious there for a second where you said you were excited at work. And I don't know when that died in me, but I just found the excitement is just not there for anything anymore. I mean, I could be going to, I don't know, New Zealand tomorrow. Never been. I won't be excited about it in any way, shape, or form. I'm not upset about it, but I'm not excited about it. That's kind of just, It seems dead inside me.
I certainly arrived there. I certainly arrived at that point where I wasn't excited about things. This was one of the indicators that it was time for me to leave.
Yeah.
I was supposed to go over to Vimy 100th anniversary as a photographer.
Wow.
And it got to the point where I basically said, I can't go. I'm so disengaged. I'm so angry. I'm so not psyched about going to do this.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of the things that led to my release, because I was actually being posted to Manitoba to CFE Shiloh. I got word in 2017 I was going to go so I was at the end of my career as an imaging technician, so I was a photographer. And I was being sent to CFE Shiloh as the base image tech. And I had a severe reaction to that news, to that posting. Yeah. Like just a very strong reaction to, nope, not going, can't do it. And first, because it wasn't the plan. The plan was I was supposed to go to the school and teach. And when I first had this reaction, I had to ask myself, was this because I'm not getting, things aren't going according to what was laid out and planned? I'm not getting the posting I want? Is that why I'm having this reaction? And I had to think about it and say, you know what? This is a posting to an army base. So I'm going to be around army guys doing army stuff, which that was my background. I wanted to get back to it. I was essentially going to be my own boss. I was going to be the only photographer on base. And I think I answered to a public affairs officer in Edmonton. So essentially kind of my own boss. It was a dream job. And I had this severe reaction where it's like, nope, I don't want to go. So I definitely got to that point where that excitement and the joy kind of left. But it was a long time coming.
Yeah. You had mentioned as well, and this had to be absolutely terrifying, was being diagnosed by the forces. I mean, I think now being diagnosed by the forces, by my particular outfit, being scary, let alone back, you said in 2001, 2002, correct?
Yeah.
What was going on there? Like, what? I guess I want to know. So this is something we can share with people who are, again, staying quiet because they're terrified of repercussions. However, you've managed to be diagnosed by your employer quite a while ago compared to, what people now know about the disorder or the injury. Yeah. What was going on in your mind at that time, and how is it that you managed to remain in for so many years later? Obviously, you really zoned in or tuned in, as you mentioned, aggressively to taking care of yourself.
I don't know if I'd say taking care of myself.
Okay, fair enough.
Because a lot of the coping mechanisms I had weren't happy, because my personal relationships, they just crumbled. And then every new relationship after that just crumbled as well. So the way I actually got diagnosed was from a dinner party. We had another couple over, and I had a buddy ask me probably 3 or 4 months after I got back from Africa, hey, did anything happen over there? Any cool stories? And I said, oh, no, it's quiet. Like standard normalized trauma response. Like, oh, yeah, everything was just mundane. Yeah,
yep, exactly. Yeah.
I actually, in that moment, recalled something that happened I'd forgotten about and just had a severe reaction to it. Now, my wife and I at the time were seeing a marriage counselor. The next session with the marriage counselor, I brought it up like, hey, this thing happened. I had a run-in the Black Mamba.
Wow.
So potentially very fatal. And I'd forgotten about that incident for 4 or 5 months, just completely off the radar. And this question at this dinner party kind of brought it up. So I said to the marriage counselor, like, isn't it funny that I forgot that? And she actually said, well, that's out of my area of expertise. I'm going to refer you to kind of talk to somebody else about that. And that happened to be a Canadian Armed Forces psychiatrist in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So that was how I got diagnosed. Very shortly, I'm going to say the injury probably started in Bosnia in 1999. But when you look at it in the scope for PTSD, to go from injury to diagnosis within, I'd say, 2 years, I think I was very fortunate that I caught it early and I was able to develop coping mechanisms that maybe weren't the healthiest, but they allowed me to function. So I think the fact that I spoke about it early, I got diagnosed, I was able to kind of keep a grip on it or able to continue to function through it. If I had clammed up about everything for 4 or 5 years before I finally, or maybe I still would have made it 17 years without being diagnosed, but I don't think I'd be in the shape I am today. I think the fact that I spoke up about it early is what allowed me to carry on.
All right, I think that's a big message that needs to get across to people, is the fact that you spoke up about it early. It obviously gave you an ability to identify the problem. And I agree with you. Look, I still am not doing a great job of taking care of myself. I can say I'm doing a much better job than I was even 3 months ago, but I still use quite a bit of alcohol to try and relax myself in the nighttime and to be able to go to sleep and not have those dreams. But likewise, I went a long time burying it, just shoving it on the rug, under the rug, until one day that finally came out. So if you could speak to just the importance of being diagnosed early.
I think I'll preface this with saying I don't think it was any wisdom on my part. I think it was just kind of the way it felt.
Yeah, for sure. But it still happened, right? As opposed to, I mean,
It did.
Yeah, it's amazing how it came up. And that's the thing, is we bury those memories. But I think this is where people can take away from this, Michael, is that in hindsight, it was a good thing that you were diagnosed early.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so what came out of that for you? What made the difference for you being diagnosed early, and why was that important? Whether or not it was your own doing, but why was that important?
Well, I think it's important because I was able to develop coping strategies that did work, that did keep me in the forces. It kept me working. If you could see me right now, you'd see the air quotations saying it kept me operationally fit, or at least allowed me to create the image of it. I think you couple that with the fact that I was 24 years old and all I ever wanted to do was be a soldier. So at this point in my life, I've got my career, it's just started. I've got a young family. So I think there was a great deal of motivation for me to manage it and to stay operationally fit. And again, I think just having that early diagnosis meant that I had the energy to develop the coping mechanisms that I did. Now, long term, those coping mechanisms eventually wore me down. And I found, especially when I left the infantry and became an imagery technician, was when things started to fall apart. So being a young man, because this happened, I was 23, 24. So I'm still within those formative adult years, very formative adult years. And I really kind of latched onto that infantry combat arms culture. It's a culture that really gave me the framework to prop myself up.
Absolutely.
In 2012, I decided I'm going to leave the infantry. My career was going really well. I was in line for promotion, but I said, you know what? I think it's time for me to do something new, some different challenges, something more creative, and I want to be a photographer. Oh, I've been in the infantry for 17 years, so, being a shutter monkey is going to be easy, right?
Right, of course. Not so much.
Well, it was an Air Force tech trade at the time, so I went from the Army to the Air Force. And that's where I learned by and by. The next 6 years of my life was a pretty quick progression from being more or less okay, or at least seeming more or less okay, to where it started to become very evident that I was not. It didn't have the physical and mental challenges that I used to have that helped me expel some of that, well, let's call it what it is. It's anxious energy. The people around me weren't indoctrinated in the same culture that I was. Everybody didn't speak the same language. And being in the infantry, most of you kind of operated on the same wavelength. And being plugged into that was a huge boost when you're dealing with all these other psychosocial issues. And I think looking at my retirement, one of the reasons I was in such a mess is because you're completely leaving that as well. But
yeah, it's the culture and camaraderie.
I got a jump start on that.
Yeah, that's scary.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's the culture and camaraderie that you're leaving as well, which is terrifying, which is scary. I mean, because I know even just COVID, for example, removing people from the ability to talk about shit that you can't talk to, I'll say civilians, normal people about.
Yep.
That's a big loss. And I think a lot of people found that tough at that point. So I can definitely empathize with it being scary to look at stepping back from that, as much as it's the right thing to do. But it also, I mean, there's there's a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood that you kind of lose as well.
Absolutely. And what I found was I went to the Air Force or to the image tech trade, and I was trying to make everybody a Royal Canadian. You know, I wanted to leave the regiment because I wanted new challenges. But then when I got there, I said, well, I want this to be like the Army. So I decided, well, I'm going to make everybody around me like the Army. Well, yeah, that did not
It didn't work out so good, no.
No, it did not. And what I realized looking back now is I projected all these expectations of how people perform and how they think and how they do things. I projected the expectations of my old culture onto my new reality. And I tried to make my new reality fit that old culture, and it just doesn't work. I was the odd man out. So I spent that 6 years as an imagery technician, as a photographer, pretty much feeling lonely and misunderstood. And without all the other things that would prop me up, like I said, I really kind of started to fall apart. So that 6 years really was kind of this slow descent into hell.
Yeah.
On the positive side of that, when it was time for me to leave the forces in 2018, I was very fortunate that I already had a failed transition under my belt, because I had failed at transitioning to being an image tech. And now I'm facing transitioning to being a civilian. I could look back and go, okay, look at the last 6 years. That did not work. I cannot attempt to do the same thing and expect different results. So, I mean, as much as it wasn't pleasant, I look at where I am today, and I have to credit it in large part to that failed transition, because that gave me the insights to not make those mistakes again, or try not to. I certainly have made some of them again, but certainly a lot more self-awareness going into that second transition.
That'll lead us right into that second transition, because as you mentioned earlier on in the discussion, you had 5 months before you were supposed to go back to school where you needed to find something to do.
Yeah.
And well, I'm not going to take away the story. Tell us what happens in those 5 months.
I moved to Simcoe, Ontario. It's a small place in Norfolk County, Ontario. I didn't know anybody at all. I rented a property out in the woods. It was gorgeous. It was serene. I had great landlords, but I just left everything that was familiar. I moved to a town where I don't know anybody. And like I said, that last year of service was absolutely terrible. And I was in a very fragile state when I left. And I just kind of said to myself, I've got to do something positive. So I was a dispatch rider for a short time during my career, so a motorcycle messenger. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to buy a motorcycle and I'm going to tour Canada, because I've never seen all of Canada. I knew that would be an amazing experience. And I decided, you know what, this may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm going to go for it. I did have the wherewithal to understand that if I just went and played tourist, it was going to be an amazing trip. But my issues were going to be sitting there waiting for me when I got back. I was just buying time. So I was actually inspired by another member of the Royal Canadian Regiment by the name of Sheldon Roberts. Just as I was releasing, I saw that Sheldon gave an interview to CBC. And Sheldon was talking about the struggles he has with PTSD. Now, I deployed with Sheldon, same mission, Sheldon twice. He's a friend, he's a mentor, he's somebody I look up to, somebody I respect. He's talking about the struggles he has with PTSD. And as I'm sitting there listening, I'm saying, yeah, I struggle with that too. And I realized that I didn't judge Sheldon harshly for the struggles that he had. I didn't think any less of him. If anything, I respected the hell out of him for having the courage to speak that openly and frankly about it. And I realized that I don't judge Sheldon harshly for it, but I judge myself harshly for those same struggles.
That's deep, very deep. Yeah.
That's what struck me. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. So I decided I was going to go out and I would talk to anybody who would listen. I was going to face it. I was going to talk about it. And maybe that'll allow me to start to heal from it. And just maybe somebody will hear what I have to say and they'll say, well, if he can talk about it, so can I. Maybe somebody else will have that reaction. So that was kind of how I got started with dispatches. And it was a whirlwind. The 1st of April, when I released, the 2nd of April, I didn't own a motorcycle. So on the 1st of May, I bought a motorcycle. I dressed it for adventure touring. And within 6 weeks, I built and published an entire schedule for the entire country over 75 days, came up with a communications plan, and just went out and started doing it. 6 weeks of feverish work building and preparing a motorcycle, buying all my gear, solving all the logistical problems of how do I keep this bike running for 2.5 months, and how do I get myself to all these locations that I'm publishing so people can go meet with me. So,
which becomes healthy, right? Because it keeps you busy, which is what you need, is to stay busy, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a physical and mental challenge. It's employing all those skills I learned as far as tactical and logistical planning in the forces Yeah, it's very healthy. It's me taking the skills that I learned in the forces and reinventing them so that I can, or applying them to the civilian world, finding relevancy. But it's also a huge positive thing that I'm doing to go out and start facing this and start talking about it and start engaging with other people. Because I mean, the natural and my natural tendency now, I still have to fight it, is when you start suffering, you withdraw and you isolate and you don't talk to people. So I know that I had to do the exact opposite of that. It's a whole lot of big positive steps in there. And on top of that, I am super, super busy. It was a great way to not just distract myself, but to distract myself with intention and with the component of healing in there as well.
Which is huge. Absolutely huge. I love the fact as well that you chose to travel because, I mean, the path typically taken is to isolate. You actually stepped out. So you take that first dispatch. Tell us where it is you went and, more importantly, what it is you learned as a result of that first ride.
I left Meaford, Ontario, I believe it was the 18th of June in 2018. And I basically rode out to Nova Scotia and then over to the west side of Newfoundland and made a big loop through Labrador, northern Quebec, back to Ontario. And then from there, straight across the country up to Yellowknife, Whitehorse, down the west coast and back. So a big figure eight around the country.
Holy shit. That's
yeah, it's like 27,000 kilometers.
Jesus. Yeah, I was kind of expecting not that far, but wow, man. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I had a plan published of where I was going to go, right down to where I was stopping for coffee every day. So in the hopes that people could come out and connect with me. What I found happened was most people realized that I was kind of what I was doing after I passed through the community. So I lost a lot of connections that way. But I was really just kind of making it up as I went as well. I suffered from the first 3 or 4 weeks, a huge amount of imposter syndrome. I rode out of Meaford going, what are you doing? You're not a motorcycle guru. So nobody's following along based on that. You're not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Who the hell are you to go talk about PTSD? And asking myself, because everything's going out on social media, and I really kind of was asking myself, are you doing this just for yourself, or is this really a healing thing, or are you just seeking attention? I really grappled with that. And it wasn't until St. John's that I actually ended up on CBC radio. And I had a woman come out who heard the show, and she came out to Tim Hortons where I was taking my coffee before I left St. John's. She walked in, and I could tell when she walked in, I knew she was coming to talk to me. I could just tell by the look on her face. She asked if she could sit down, and we talked for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And I don't remember a lot of what we talked about, but she said, you know what? I heard my story come out of your mouth. And
that resonates.
Oh, yeah. And she said, I'm so glad that I heard somebody say the things that are in my head. So I'm not the only one. And that was really that turning point where I said to myself, okay, this matters. This is going to have an impact. And it took 2 or 3 weeks of riding before I kind of found myself and said, yeah, this really is going to be something positive. I rode around Canada. I interviewed a few veterans. I shared a few YouTube videos just as things occurred to me. I talk about them and share them. That kind of rounded out that trip, and I got home in September and immediately went to school. So busy, right?
Right, yeah.
But it really set the stage because now I've gone out and I've put myself out there. I've talked about things that have been vulnerable. I've forced myself to go out and connect with people instead of withdrawing from them. And now I'm walking into a classroom with mostly a bunch of kids right out of high school, very different levels of life experience from me. And I now have to integrate into this environment. So it really set the stage for that. I was already pushed myself out of my comfort zone, so it was a little easier to walk into this environment.
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked there, Michael, if you tried to make them army.
You know what? And I still found it wasn't until a little bit into that experience that I realized, okay, I'm still projecting expectations. And so, yeah, it was very much a learning journey and really kind of dissecting what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, and taking a step back and looking at myself and saying, what am I doing to create this stress? I'm like, well, I'm still expecting people to be duty, honor, integrity, self-discipline, mission before self, all those things that are part of that culture. Still becoming disappointed when they weren't living up to those standards, and then realizing because part of it is the motto of the Royal Canadian Regiment is never pass a fault. So for 20 years, what was kind of beaten into me was when you see somebody who's not doing something the right way, you have to fix it or you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
So when I'm projecting these expectations onto everybody around me, my brain tells me where they're not doing the right thing. And if I don't sort it out, I'm failing.
Yeah, no, that becomes a part of training though, right? And I think a lot of times we fall back on that. And that's where I think sometimes as well gives us some of these issues in terms of trying to deal with people outside of our service, I guess, for lack of a better term. And that
outside of that culture?
Outside of that culture, yeah. It's a very demanding culture, but one that you can easily thrive in as well. And if you do thrive in it, you tend to become a workaholic. You
Yep.
tend to become somewhat of a perfectionist, always striving to do better, and do it quicker or more efficiently or whatever. And yeah, we wonder why a lot of times it's those people that are hitting some sort of a burnout where, you're just working yourself to not feel all the other shit that's going on in your mind. It becomes a coping thing. It really does.
When that never pass the fault mentality, because that was just the culture you lived in, you had a lot of backup in that. So what was basically happening, and what I realized, I'm projecting this expectation onto the people around me, an expectation they're not even aware of, right?
Yeah.
And then when they fail to meet that expectation, I'm taking ownership of that failure. So, I mean, it's lose lose. And really, the biggest turning point for me in that was saying, okay, I have to let go of the collective ownership of these expectations, expecting other people to do it. Because part of not sorting that problem out is a violation of my own values, right? And that's the point where I had to say that value doesn't serve me anymore. What I came to realize was, you know what? I can hold myself to those standards. I can hold myself to those high standards without having to expect other people to do it. And I can simply do that and lead by example. And those who are ready to follow that example will follow it. I don't have to force people into it. I don't have to take ownership of their actions. So it was that realization that abandoning my values, my expectation of those values on other people, isn't a failure on my part. It's really kind of the way the world works, not inside that very kind of regimented culture. And as soon as I did that, that's where that particular roadblock kind of started to get dismantled.
You're hitting the nail on the head of something that I guess I've never really managed to put together. Is that something that I do as well? And it's not just not a failure of yours, it's not a failure of theirs either.
No, not at all.
But that becomes a very difficult pill to swallow, right?
Yeah.
It really does. And it's kind of like, I don't understand how it is or why it is you do this or fail to do this or can't do your absolute best on everything. It kind of drives me crazy. However, that's got nothing to do with them and a lot more to do with me. And I love your concept of withdrawing from those values that are no longer serving you. That's great. The other great thing I gotta say really resonated with me was you call it your imposter. Was it an imposter syndrome or an imposter?
Yep.
Yeah, an imposter syndrome. Because you're questioning, what the hell am I doing? Like, really, what am I doing? Likewise, I mean, I'm here doing it today.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'm kind of wondering, what am I doing? Really? I mean, yeah, I've done podcasts for a while, but I'm struggling with this still. And I'm just trying to talk to people. And why do people necessarily want to talk to me? Why are people turning to me? And you sort of really start kneecapping yourself until you all of a sudden have that amazing feedback from people, getting those. So, I mean, for me, it's emails or direct messages or text messages where people are saying the same thing, that you're saying exactly what I've been feeling. You're saying exactly what I've been thinking. I don't have the strength or the courage to do what you're doing. And those things really resonate. And it really does make you want to push forward with this. So I come full circle back to you. And that's how this dispatch becomes dispatches. You decide this is something that's going to be done annually, as opposed to it being a ride. Tell us about that.
It's gone through a few iterations. So in 2018, I partnered with Military Minds Inc. And the idea was we'd make it a group ride. Military Minds Inc., and I know you know Rob.
Absolutely, yeah.
You've met Rob.
Yeah, Rob Truscott. Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, so they ran what has now become its own entity, the Rolling Barrage. And I happened to meet up with them in Calgary on that first ride. I met with Rob in Edmonton. And I'll give Rob a shout out because Rob has been right from the beginning, from the moment we met, he's been one of my staunchest supporters. And he's actually the guy who facilitated the introduction to you and I. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
I've really got to thank Rob for everything he's done to promote what I'm doing. So, yeah, we partnered up with, it was then Military Minds Inc., who ran the Rolling Barrage. And we decided to try and do it as kind of a group ride. It went okay, but what I found was, once I had a couple of other people there that I had to look out for and were part of the ride and who bring their own expectations of that experience and everything else, I couldn't do the outreach. I couldn't connect with all the other people through the communities that I was traveling in. So that was 2019. It was a shorter ride just around the St. Lawrence Seaway. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to doing the big ride and doing it solo so that I have more positive control and I do more of the outreach side of it, because I found it was the outreach side of it that was sustaining me. That was the thing that was recharging me, was the connections with other people and connections with a lot of people, like a lot of exposure. So that was the idea. Now, of course, we know some stuff happened in 2020.
What?
So there was no ride in 2020. I had actually reached out to a fellow named Patrice Berriot in Montreal. He's a documentary film director. And he was going to join me for the cross-country ride to film a documentary. And of course, that ride didn't happen. So I went out to Quebec and we shot for a week to do a little bit of a demo to get acquainted. So lots of interviewing and talking with him, the other members of the production team. 2021, of course, the plan full steam ahead, going to go all the way around the country again. And it just didn't happen. I probably could have done the ride, but I couldn't do the outreach. Because by this time I was looking at booking actual formalized speaking engagements. I worked on like, what's my deliverable? Well, I'm going to go out and have presentations where I share my story and invite people just to talk or ask questions afterwards or share. And so 2021, we didn't go because I realized I might be able to ride, but I can't do the outreach. I'm going to hold off again. So in 2021, we just did about 20 days around southwestern Ontario and a bit of Quebec. And we filmed through that as well. And then that finally brought us to 2022. And again, at this point, I'm starting to get very organized. You know, I've got my deliverables as far as my speaking engagements. I'm starting to book venues and people are, after 5 years, are finally starting to realize like, oh, like he's serious about this.
He's not giving this shit up.
Yeah. And part of it too is building a reputation, right? Because as just some guy out riding around looking to talk to people about mental health, people wonder, well, what are your credentials? What is he bringing? And I know I faced some challenges getting bookings. And as I talk to more and more people, I realize people have booked speakers like me before, and it has not gone well. In fact, it's gone very bad. So there were some organizations who were very gun shy about it. But I was very lucky. A lot of the military family resource centers across the country, they were willing to put the trust in me. And, you know, I was able to get in front of some of those audiences, and some of them have become, again, amazing supporters. Hello, Manitoba. Actually, I was there in September as part of my tour. They flew me out again in January to come speak at their health symposium. So that to me was a huge win because they're like, yeah, you were just here a few months ago. We want you to come back.
That is huge. Yeah, that is huge.
Yeah, that really kind of was the first time I was drawn to, like, somebody asked me to come somewhere. I've been asked for a few other events, but you know, that was a big one, right? So yeah, it took kind of 5 years of this, just being very dedicated to it. And it's a lot of that imposter syndrome creeps in when you're not getting the engagement you want. You wonder, like, am I bringing a value, or people don't see it? Like, what am I doing wrong? It really just takes consistent effort before people realize, like, where they say, yeah, you know what, we're going to invite this guy to talk and we're going to be in good hands for that hour or 2 hours that he's with us.
Michael, I think that imposter syndrome is reciprocal because you are generally dealing with a group of people who are struggling with an injury that causes, one thing it causes is generally distrust. And you kind of think, yeah, what's the catch here? What's the bullshit here, right?
What's the route?
What's going on here? Like, who the hell is this guy to tell me? Like, really? We're going to take a quick break and get back into this, and we'll talk about how it is you managed to break through after 5 years and what your plans are for 2023. This episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is brought to you thanks to the support and financial sponsorship of Cracked Armor. Go to crackedarmor.com, read the story, buy the gear, wear it to send a message to others who are struggling that they're not alone. Also to Willow Tree Farms, care of Jason Sobkowicz, another member who is struggling with PTSD and who updates his Instagram frequently to share his story. You can follow him at jason.sobkowicz. We are back from the break. Thank you very much again. This is the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast, and we're talking with Michael Terry, a 23-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, who is now on his 6th year of the Dispatches Adventure Ride speaking tour. Michael, let's get back to, I guess, that second booking when you get like a repeat customer sort of thing. You go, okay, well, I'm offering something pretty good here if you're calling me back.
Well, yeah, actually, we had just finished the event in September in Shiloh. And as we were kind of cleaning up, they were saying, well, would you come back? So they were ready to invite me back right there on the spot. And you kind of asked before the break about breaking through after 5 years. Well, I've got to give part of that credit to Patrice Berriot, the documentary director. The documentary right now, I know the working title is The Messenger. It's in post-production now and should be out this coming winter or early in 2024. Once you had another perspective and somebody else kind of telling my story, it's going to reach other ears, right? So, I mean, that brought a lot of attention to what I'm doing as well. Those collaborations is really kind of what started to build that reputation or build that exposure. And again, just that consistent effort and working through the doubt, because there were long periods of time where you're putting stuff out on social media and you're not hearing anything back, and you start going, is this actually working? Am I actually reaching anybody? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and those seeds of doubt start to get sown, and you start to wonder, should I give it up? And then all of a sudden you'll get a message from somebody telling you how much something you did impacted them in a positive way and how much it meant to them. And it seemed like every time I felt like I'm ready to quit, I've gotten one of those messages.
It's almost like a little bit of a drug, for lack of a better term. I mean, it gives you that little bit of spark to go, okay, I am getting through. I just need to keep going.
Yeah. And one of the things too is, I look at last year and this year was the first 2 years of the official speaking tour when I had it structured that way and I was booking events. And it's very humbling when you book an event and nobody shows up.
Jesus, yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's easier to talk to a room of 10,000 than a room of 2, I'll tell you that.
Absolutely.
And one of my first presentations, there were 3 people in the audience. One of them was the guy who owned the room I was renting, the venue.
Oh, Christ. Yeah.
One was a guy that I had ridden with in 2019, so he's another veteran, a guy I knew. And the other was my sister.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
That's
that was
awesome.
that
That's
was
funny.
a hard room to play to, I'm going to tell you, because, and especially my sister being there, because I was talking about things that affected me, and it is impossible to not see her reactions.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's very humbling, and I grappled with that, like, okay, what am I doing wrong, or people don't see the value, or is there a need for this? And what I've come to realize is, like, let's be honest, getting people to come out in person to hear you talk about PTSD, that's an uphill battle. One, it's not the most pleasant thing to talk about. But for anybody who's struggling, the feeling I imagine is I have to self-identify in order to walk into that room. If I show up in that room, people are going to know I'm affected.
That's true. That's true.
So that, I think, is part of the challenge. I've had guys I deployed with, guys I served with, who said, yeah, I'm coming to your talk, and then never showed up. And I know when it happens, I'll probably get a message in a day or two, and without fail, I do. And they say, look, I was ready to leave the house and I couldn't. And, and they're very apologetic. And I have to say, like, don't apologize. I understand that. Like, I've been there.
Yeah.
You make commitments to go somewhere or do something, and then the day comes and you just can't. So that's kind of the beauty of the ride, because I share my route info and my daily schedule. This is where I'm starting from. This is when I'm taking a coffee break. So it's all published online. All the route info is there. I have a GPS tracker that updates my position every 5 minutes. The idea being people know where I'm going to be roughly when, and they can cross-reference with the tracker and come out and connect. And it doesn't have to be at one of these formal events where they have to self-identify. They can come out to a Tim Hortons where I'm having coffee, and we can sit and talk about the weather. And as I'm sure you know, just being in the presence of somebody who you just know understands what you're going through, you don't even need to talk about it.
Absolutely.
A lot of magic happens in those moments. I've had people, and this is probably one of the most edifying experiences, like that woman who stopped in at Tim Hortons in St. John that first time. She wasn't going to stop in. She really grappled with it. But the fact that I'm going through her town, or, through somebody's town, and I'm only going to be there half an hour at that Tim Hortons, creates a sense of urgency as well, because this guy's out doing this. And if I want to connect with him, I've got this one shot. So I've had a few people come out and tell me, like, I usually don't leave the house, but I had to come out and meet you. And that's huge. That is so huge.
Absolutely.
If you happen to look at the route map, I mean, I go everywhere through northern Quebec and Labrador, the Northwest Territories. And one of the great things is that I'm doing this outreach, albeit casual outreach, but I'm going to communities where people don't do outreach, and people really respond to that. Like, you're going to the places where these people live and giving them an opportunity to come out and connect. That's one of the things that they respond to, is like, you cared enough to come here. I can come out and talk to you for a few minutes.
Yeah.
So 2020.
Have you come up with a map yet? Yeah, for 2023, have you come up with your plans as of yet?
Not yet. So last year, because I was touring the entire country and I had to fit that into 3.5 months, scheduling's really tight. What I found is I didn't have flexibility in the communities I visited. Like, if I visited Halifax on a Sunday, you get Sunday. People don't want to come out and talk about PTSD and mental health on their weekend. And I also noticed that after the 1st of July, attendance or engagement at these events plummeted because people were out traveling. That and the fact that, when I did this in 2018, I was a single guy. I rented a house, so I didn't have any responsibilities. I had no responsibilities at all. And when I came home, my bed was still made. Everything was right where I left it. In 2022, I was kind of chasing that feeling. And I found it wasn't the same. So now I'm married. We're just starting a family. I work for Concussion Legacy Foundation. I teach Fancher College. So I had these things to come back to. I'm a homeowner, so I've got responsibilities there. And being disconnected from that life for 3.5 months, it took a toll. It was just too much.
Yeah.
My priorities have changed from that workaholic, I want to be out adventuring all the time, to no, I actually want to be at home. So this year, I leave the 10th of June ish, and I'm going to tour New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland, and Labrador. And I'm going to do that loop in about 5 weeks. So my last speaking engagement will be like the 4th of July in Goose Bay.
Wow. Yeah, that's still a lot of riding, man. I mean,
yeah, it's still a few
the
months.
East Coast is a lot bigger than people think. Newfoundland is a lot bigger than people think.
Oh, yes. What I'm doing then is booking speaking engagements Monday through Friday. I'm taking my weekends to do maintenance and recharge. 2024, the plan is to go back out west. And I'm just going to alternate different regions of the country, I think, from this point forward. It was great to come out of COVID and that massive tour, and it's very symbolic. But when I looked at it in 2018, this served a definite purpose of doing this entire tour. 2022, it did, but it really showed me that, you know what, there are more efficient ways to do this, and there are ways to do it without jeopardizing the connection I have to my home and my family.
And that's paramount. I mean, that's paramount.
Oh,
right? That's reality. You have to take care of your home base. Otherwise, you don't have a home base, which is really not a good thing for anybody, let alone someone who's struggling with post-traumatic stress. So yeah, it makes sense.
It really drove home to me when I did the loop out east and I got back to Ontario about 6 weeks in. I was like, I could go home right now. I'm supposed to go to the Northwest Territories and the Rockies.
Yeah, I'm tapped. Yeah.
But I could go home. And that was a huge moment for me. It was very difficult to leave Ontario again, heading out west. It was honestly quite painful, but it was also incredibly encouraging because I said, you know what? I've never felt this draw to be home. When I was serving, I had a family, I had kids at home, but home was a horrible place. And I'm not putting that on my family. I'm just saying I wasn't comfortable there. I couldn't function there. I didn't want to be there. So the fact that I was so desperately missing home and wanting to go was a huge watershed moment because I said, wow, I have changed. That is such a change from before in priority and perspective. It was a huge moment. And then I had to just get on with the rest of the tour because I made the commitment, right? But if it hadn't been for the mission, I would have gone home.
Yeah, for sure. And so I love the idea that you're going to now break up the country, which is going to be, I think, better on you and as well solidify for those people who want to come out and see you that you're not going to be back next year. It's going to be at least a couple of years because you're splitting the country in two.
Yeah.
How is it that people can follow you, can get involved, whether it's sponsoring, volunteering, meeting up with you? How do people get to learn about the Dispatches Adventure Ride?
There's the website, www.dispatchesride.com, and all my travel info goes on there. There's a calendar there, links to events, all that good stuff. But also social media. Facebook is probably my biggest driver of engagement. Just go on Facebook and search for Dispatches Adventure Ride. You can also find me through Instagram and LinkedIn. As far as getting involved, people can come out and ride. The route info is published for that purpose. You can come out and join me for coffee. Even if you don't ride, come out and join me for coffee at one of the rest stops. You can check out the events and come out to the speaking events. You don't have to be a veteran or a first responder. You don't have to be affected by PTSD because I've had people who have family members who are affected or friends or family come out and say, hearing you speak gave me perspective on what my loved one or my friend might be experiencing.
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah. So it's open to anybody to come out. In terms of donation, if you go through the website, there's a link there to donate. I take donations when I'm on the road. I don't charge for my speaking engagements. There's no entry fee. I don't charge organizations to host me or have me come out, because I don't want money to be a barrier. Now, Shiloh flew me out. They paid my travel expenses to come out, but I don't take a speaking fee. I really don't want there to be any barriers to anybody who wants to have a conversation about mental health to come out.
That's fantastic.
Yes. As far as volunteering, you know what? If people in communities across Canada say, you know what, I know this organization, or if you have any leads on organizations that might want to host a speaking event when I'm touring, when I have contacts in communities, that's when these events are successful. So sharing that I'm going to be in your community, or going to your local Lions Club or your Legion and saying, hey, this guy's coming through, maybe we should get him to come talk here. I'll go talk anywhere and to anybody about mental health, because probably one of the biggest things I learned as I started doing this was that, I share some of my experiences, but mostly I focus on the struggles and the impacts and what I've done to work through it, or what I'm still doing to work through it. I find when we don't focus on the experiences and we focus on the human impact and the struggles, we're all the same. regardless of the experience that brought us there. Everybody can identify and connect with it. That's been a huge part of my transition, connecting with people who don't share my background. It's just being vulnerable and being open. And that's what allows those connections to happen. So yeah, in terms of volunteering and support, share it. And if you know I'm coming through somewhere near you, if you want to set up I don't care if it's 1,000 people or 20 people or 10 people, or it doesn't matter.
Your sister is not invited though, right?
Yeah. You know what? No, she's been a huge supporter, but yeah, you know what? She can come out when there's 1,000 people in the room, and then that way I don't have to be directly impacted by her reactions.
There you go. Exactly. Well, when you do come out here, I would love the opportunity to meet up and do an update with regards to your 2023 ride. And perhaps we can look at doing something out here. You and I'll talk after the show or in the upcoming weeks.
Absolutely.
And see what we can put together out here. In the meantime, for those who are listening from across the country, regardless if you're out east or not, you likely know someone out here. Make sure you pass this along to them. Take a look at the website. It's Dispatches Ride, Delta India Sierra Papa Alpha Tango Charlie Hotel Echo Sierra Romeo India Delta Echo.com. I went really fast on that, but if you're a dispatcher, probably you got that no problem whatsoever. Yeah, take a look on dispatchesride.com. You can track them down. You can track Michael down on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. As you mentioned, Facebook is where you're going to have probably the most success in social media. And you can donate on here. You can see some information on the Messenger, the road documentary that was spoken about. There's a live map here, so you'd be able to follow him. So to kind of go, I didn't know he was driving through this area. You can't use that, man. You can't use that. Stay tuned to the show. I'm going to ask Michael to stay in contact with me so I can give updates throughout the next several episodes and just let people know what's happening. And let's get this thing moving, because I think it's absolutely not only fantastic what you're doing, Michael, but very much needed.
Oh, well, thank you, Larry. Yeah, we really appreciate that.
Is there anything else that you would like to say to clue things up? This is your time, sir.
You know, Larry, thank you for doing what you do. These discussions about mental health, however they come about, whether they're podcasts, whether they're in person or whatever, the more voices that we add to this and the more peer voices that we add, because somebody else's voice is going to reach people that mine simply can't. So the more people who talk about this, the further down the road we're going to be, the better off we're going to be as veterans, as first responders, just as Canadians and the world over. So yeah, just really thank you you said you struggle with the imposter syndrome, and what you're doing, I think, is very worthwhile. And I'm just very honored that you took the time to speak with me today. And I really can't wait to get out and see you in June.
Thanks, brother. It's an absolute pleasure to have spoken with you, to get to know you a bit more. And I really and genuinely look forward to the opportunity to meet in person and talk again this summer.
Absolutely.
So for everyone, again, get on that www.dispatchesride.com. Follow Michael in his travels, in his journeys. Get out and be part of it. Come out, talk to him, meet him for a coffee, go to a discussion or a talk he's having. Just get out there and listen, and likely that will make you feel a bit better about all the shit that you're going through and what's happening with you. My name is Larry Payton. I have your 6. Please have mine.
Don't go away. There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I sing. Don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.